All right, welcome to the show, Renato. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to chat with you about your restaurant work. Do you mind sharing for people listening a little bit of background on who you are, where you're coming in from today, and the type of work that you do?
Well, my name is Renato Poliafito, and I'm the owner of Ciao, Gloria, which is a bakery cafe located here in Brooklyn, Prospect Heights neighborhood. And I recently opened up a restaurant directly across the street from Ciao, Gloria called Pasta Night, which is like a Trattoria style, like a neighborhood Italian pasta place, kind of like a sister shop to Ciao Gloria. So I have my little empire here in my little part of Brooklyn.
Amazing. I'm curious to learn more about that too, because I've actually never been to New York despite being able to talk with a lot of people. Do you mind kind of explaining the type of community that you have in Prospect Heights and how your like Pasta Night and Ciao Gloria kind of fit into that community as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been living in Brooklyn pretty much all of my adult life, so I consider myself a Brooklynite for sure. My parents actually even emigrated here from Sicily in the late 50s. They came to a neighborhood called Bushwick, which is very trendy now, which is so strange. But
Yeah.
I've lived in this area, which is considered South Brooklyn, since the late 90s. And Prospect Heights is this great neighborhood right off of Prospect Park. And, you know, if you are familiar with Brooklyn, it's a very big, city within, the five boroughs. It used to be the second most populated city in the U.S. But now it's just part of the whole kind of like New Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens kind of five borough thing. So, but Brooklyn's a great neighborhood. It's a great borough. Every neighborhood has its own kind of vibe. Brooklynites are, I always consider them these old school New Yorkers in a lot of ways. A lot of people have kind of come through here in immigrant waves throughout the centuries. And Prospect Heights in general is just like this great, lovely neighborhood with it's dynamic, it's diverse, the people are friendly, and Ciao Gloria is kind of like one of the main coffee shops in the neighborhood where people come and hang out, do their work, have lunch. It's a little bit of everything. So, to provide a service like that is something I've always wanted. I've always been as interested in creating an environment for people as I've been in creating food for people. And I'm trying to replicate that idea with Pasta Night across the street. I want it to be a neighborhood place where people can come on the regular and just get really good food, really good pasta, really good kind of like Italian-American classics.
Well, that's fantastic. And I think you're speaking to the idea of creating an environment for people. And I think that's something that we're all quite hungry for, especially kind of coming out of COVID and relocating ourselves in the world and what that means and figuring out what those spaces look like and how we can operate in those. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, I want it to be something for everybody. Sometimes there's conflict, especially with laptop users and people wanting to, I just want to come and have a sandwich and I have no place to sit. So we're trying to kind of be a little bit of everything to everybody. But in that as well, it always causes some kind of we need to make decisions and how to be and how to present ourselves. But aside from that, the creation of the environment, the creation of the space, what it sounds like, what the lighting is like, what the colors evoke, it's something that in my previous life I was a designer. So I tend to kind of lean heavily into that phase of the creation of a business.
I think that's a really interesting kind of background that you bring to it as well, because I think especially for younger generations, that idea of creating an environment or an atmosphere to experience the food and really making it that full experience is certainly more top of mind when they're walking into a space too. So I'm curious, when you're thinking about Ciao Gloria versus Pasta Night, can you kind of expand on what those two atmospheres look like and, whether they complement each other or kind of piggyback off each other and what that looks like as well?
Well, it's funny because Ciao Gloria was the design intention, the thought behind it was the vibe, whatever you want to call it, was 50s and 60s coastal Italy. So a little post-war, a little talented Mr. Ripley feeling, that this kind of just beautiful shades of blue and shades of earth tones and just a sunny kind of vibe, a sunny atmosphere within the space. Design-wise, I wanted it to be just very clean and simple, but, it's evocative within the branding, it's evocative within the color palette, that sort of thing. With Pasta Night, it became a slightly more personal design idea where it, I guess piggybacks is a good word, but the idea was it was going to be 70s and 80s country countryside Italy, like kind of like a little more inland, so southern in a lot of ways. And it's evocative of my experience with Italy, which is as a kid going to Italy and going to Sicily, where my family is from, in the 70s and 80s. So it became a slightly more personal design experience for me. But that's how they kind of play off of each other. And I kind of called this one The Talented Mr. Ripley, and the other one Call Me By Your Name, because I feel like those two movies kind of evoke the eras and the design aesthetic and the sounds, the music, the, you know, all that sort of thing. So that's how I kind of played it off. So they're sister shops, but they're two different eras within the same.
That's super cool. And I love that it plays off of each other and kind of, you know, creates this kind of continued experience for people as well.
Exactly.
So I want to talk a little bit more about pasta night and the concept, because I was reading that it came from, you know, monthly pasta nights that you were originally having at Ciao, Gloria. So can you kind of walk through the process of how it moved from that monthly event into its own Trattoria style place to get pasta?
Of course. So at the beginning, when we opened Pasta Night, opened Ciao it was October of 2019, 6 months before the pandemic hit. One of the things I really wanted to do, because we were a daytime cafe, it seemed like a waste to not utilize the space at night, because it just also happened to be a very pretty space in the evening, the lighting and everything. So for my team to kind of like flex their muscles, I was like, let's do a Pasta Night. Let's like make a dinner series sort of thing, and we'll do it once a month, and we'll make pasta. We'll have like a kind of like a fixed price dinner, including dessert and starters and a drink and all that. So we did do that, and we did that for a few months, and then COVID happened, and we had to shut down, and we were closed for a couple of months. We reopened with a slightly more a slightly more considered menu, and focused a little more on lunch and savory during the day, because we started doing delivery and a lot of people were working from home and we wanted to feed them. So we just made a more robust lunch menu, and then we kind of pulled back a little on the bakery side of things, and then kind of rebuilt the business from there as it got a little busier month after month and people started kind of coming out of their homes. What we sacrificed was the pasta nights. We tried to do it as soon as we were allowed to have people sit outside, but then it kind of coincided with winter coming again, so we could only do it a few times. And then we tried doing like take-home pasta kits every Sunday.
Oh, cool.
Which were very popular, but we started getting too busy to kind of like accommodate a whole other kind of revenue stream, a whole other kind of business within Ciao. So I had to sadly kind of like put the whole concept to rest for a little while. It was bittersweet because it was because we were getting so busy during the day. We were a small space and we couldn't do it. That said, in 2023, I guess? Yeah, at the end of 2023, a space across the street opened up, and the owners of the building reached out to us. They're regulars, and they're like, you know, you should really take it, otherwise, you know, another cafe is going to open up. And I was like, oh boy. I had really no intention of opening up another space, but, you know, the opportunity was there, the rent was good, I liked the landlords. I knew I couldn't open up another cafe to compete with my own cafe.
Right.
So I was like, well, what am I going to do? And the only other thing that I was like interested in, of course, is pasta. So I was like, okay, maybe that becomes pasta night, and I have this kind of like day part business thing where it's like breakfast and lunch here, and then I could kind of do a lunch and dinner thing there, and people can choose throughout the day. It's like, oh, today I'll go to pasta night, tomorrow I'll go to Ciao for lunch, or just come to dinner, come for breakfast, come for coffee. It's like it's all there for you. So I'm trying to kind of like feed the neighborhood all day long.
Awesome. That is a very great intention too. Like, I feel like that just makes everyone, especially in a neighborhood setting, knowing that you can go to those sorts of places and that you've got every meal covered and snacks as well is hugely important. So do you mind explaining a little bit about Trattoria style in terms of what pasta night offers and the degree of formality, or what that looks and feels like for people that haven't experienced that before?
Well, yeah. When we opened up pasta night, the idea was to be like something called fine casual, which was a concept I absolutely loved, but it just wasn't being received well by the neighborhood. Fine casual basically just meant, you know, it's restaurant quality. It's like very high-end food, but you're just ordering at the counter. And then you sit down. It takes a lot of the fuss and like the white tablecloths and all that stuff out. It tends to work I've seen this work in some cities throughout the US, but for whatever reason, the balance of it just didn't seem to be making sense to people. It seemed to be a little confusing. So I was like, you know what? Let's just scrap that. So we'll do counter service during the day, where for lunch you can get your sandwich, your salad, your plate of pasta, and go sit down. At night, we'll do table service. We switched to table service. It changed everything. It started working very well. It made sense to people. Sometimes people just want the classics. But the Trattoria style in general is a very casual approach to eating in Italy. It's like, it's hot food. It's, a rotating assortment of dishes. Obviously it's Italian food, so it's usually hyper local, super fresh. It's whatever is in season. And we're trying to kind of take those cues and implement them here. So even though the quality of our pasta and our dishes are, relatively elevated, they're still at an affordable price point, and the atmosphere is very comfortable. You shouldn't feel like, there's no stuffiness and no pretense at all. You go in, you sit down, you order your food. You could be, if you want, in and out of there in like 20 minutes. If you really, really want to be. Or you can make an event of it and be there for, the hour and a half that, people usually stay for dinner, So it's a choose your own adventure in a lot of ways. And, we have the front part of the restaurant is a little, it has the bar and it has the alimentari, which is like a little marketplace where we sell our fresh pasta, we sell our sauces, we sell a bunch of other things for your basic needs in the kitchen, whether it's everything from like pasta tools to different sauces and olives and salt and spices and things like that. So you could technically go in, get dinner, prepare it at home, or buy something for takeout at the register, get a cocktail, or come in for dinner, or even dessert. Ciao, Gloria is a great bakery right across the street, and we provide all the desserts for pasta nights.
That's pretty immersive then, wow.
Yeah. It's a whole experience.
That's fantastic. I'm curious too, because I know you have a background as a baker, and I know with Ciao Gloria you've got the pastries, as you mentioned. In terms of, expanding into pasta, given your baking foundations, what's that been like for you? Well,
I'm self-taught in a lot of ways. As a baker, I didn't go to culinary school. I learned from watching my mom. My mom was an avid, obviously, she was, a homemaker. So her, she did all the jobs around the house. So I'm also very fastidious and meticulous around the home. It's like I need things a certain way. But she was a great cook. She was a great savory cook. And I really just kind of spent I was a mama's boy, so I spent all my time in the kitchen. I would help her out. I would just be within the vicinity, And she baked too, but she had like her kind of set items that she would bake, So I learned how to make those things. But prior to Ciao Gloria, I owned a bakery called Baked for many years. And that's where I really kind of cut my teeth. I jumped into that experience. And learned how to bake on premises. I had to figure it out. Taking all that experience with me, it was something I did for about 13, 14 years, bringing that experience with me to Ciao. But Ciao was infusing my culture and my background into the menu, whereas Baked was American classics, Ciao is Italian American. So I'm taking that whole idea, and that's basically the brand of Ciao and Pasta Night. It's this Italian American experience, and the baking ends up over there as well in lots of ways. Like we're doing our bread program is going to be kind of underway at Pasta Night, so we'll be making our focaccias and our semolina rolls for both locations from there. There will be a baking component there as well, and there is already, but the desserts are made here and brought over there. And the desserts we're making here for Pasta Night are a little more Italian leaning.
Oh, cool.
The spoonable desserts like tiramisu and panna cotta and, more plated style types of desserts, whereas here it's a more grab and go, kind of like American style bakery where you can get like an amaretti cookie or a chocolate chip or a like a slice of carrot cake, that sort of thing.
Fantastic. I always regret booking these interviews around lunchtime because then I'll listen to what you're saying and I get so hungry.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I only speak in food, so it's people either love me or hate me.
Fair. So you had mentioned too, you're pulling from your Italian American heritage, and that's something we've been talking a lot about throughout this season of the podcast, is looking at migration stories and like how food acts as a conduit for those. And something about your story that I found really interesting was, you had mentioned going to Italy as a child and how that's like inspiring a lot of the work. So do you mind kind of speaking to how those experiences have shaped your cooking and how you kind of map that onto Italian-American heritage as well?
Yeah, sure. So my parents came to America in 1957 from Sicily. They had met when they were like in their single digits. They were like,
oh my gosh,
kids when they met. So
wow.
it was like a lifelong romance for my parents. But they came to America at that point, and throughout my brother and sister, I have an older brother and sister, and my childhood, they would bounce back and forth from Sicily to New York, and we would spend very extended periods of time in Sicily. So, and another thing that I grew up just, in my family, my father was very much like, in the house you're in Italy, and outside of the house you're in America, kind of thing. It's like, but we follow kind of like Italian style rules in this house.
Right.
So we ate Italian, we cooked Italian, we watched Italian TV. It was just that's how it was. We had a very kind of like, the culture never really truly left, and we never really truly adapted to American culture in the home. There would be little infusions of it here and there, and simply because I was the youngest and I was the most Americanized of the family, because of me, small American institutions would like find their way into our house. But in a way, it was interesting because I got the best of both worlds. I really am half American and half Italian, so I can kind of switch back and forth if I need to. And it really kind of influenced everything I did at Ciao and everything I'm doing at Pasta Night, from the dishes we're serving to the style we're serving, because true Italian and Italian American, there are sometimes great discrepancies between certain dishes and how things are interpreted or understood, or the ingredients, that sort of thing. So I try to straddle the best of both worlds and keep some dishes classically Italian, but then, give the American Italian version of certain dishes. Like our lasagnas might be a little extra cheesy and a little, larger than life, whereas the cacio e pepe is a classic Roman dish. We're keeping it classic. We may just have fun with the pasta shape.
Yeah, that's really awesome, because I think a lot about the idea of like Italian American cuisine as such a rich history in and of itself, and there's so many generations of chefs and bakers that are really like propelling that forward. So even just in terms of thinking about like what ingredients you use or what recipes you craft, do you mind kind of speaking a little bit more to what that looks like versus what you would get more regionally through Italy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Italians tend to, when you're in Italy, I personally, my experience is there are a lot of hits and misses in Italy when it comes to food. Sometimes they tend to, and I've said this a dozen times, and I'm glad I haven't been burned at the stake yet, but I find that sometimes Italians tend to rest on their laurels when it comes to certain types of cuisine. It's like, don't touch it because it's perfect the way it is. You don't have to, do anything to it. And then, like, sometimes I'm like, well, then how do you leave your mark? How does the cuisine advance? How does it grow? How does it change? And I feel like, in certain aspects that causes a stagnant quality to the cuisine. So, here in America, it's all about inventiveness and ingenuity and changing things and whatever, which in its own respect can be a little annoying as well. Fair. It's like, how many times can you like reinvent a croissant? It's like
cronut.
Yeah, exactly. And now it's, now it's a cube, and now it's this, and now it's that. And it's just that kind of hypermania tends to drive me crazy as well. Sometimes things are best left alone. But, when it comes to, American appetites, for example, I would just want to create the best possible version of something, and I'll look through the history of the dish and see how many people interpret it, and sometimes just cherry pick components and be like, okay, well, this doing it this way is really amazing or interesting, and using these ingredients coupled with that may produce a dish that is like the best version of that dish, and that's how I kind of try to approach things. Is make something that evokes a little bit of nostalgia, but is also a little innovative, but is classic enough that you kind of want it again and again. You don't want to make something that's so unique and you eat it once and you're like, oh, okay, well, that was really interesting, but I want something that you want like on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Totally, yeah, yeah. There's like, I was rereading Feasting Wild, and she has a chapter in it where she talks about like going to Noma and how this experience was like very interesting, but there are certain, that's not something that you could do obviously every day. And it takes away from, I think there's like a certain time and place for particular foods as well that people, especially when you think about like pasta, that's something that is, you want it to maintain its accessibility for people as well.
Yeah, and you want it to be hearty. You want it to be, pasta was created to kind of, to feed. And so if you, go to a restaurant and you're getting like 3 little things of pasta and like a tiny little pyramid and that's it, it's just like great. But again, is it something I want to eat all the time? I think that's the idea of a neighborhood spot, is you want it to be accessible enough and familiar enough and hit all of those notes so it is a go-to. It's not something that like for a special occasion or, you're just like, it's so expensive that you can only go every once in a while, I really want to try to, and it's very hard to do that right now with the cost of things, but I'm trying my best.
Fair. Yeah. And I definitely appreciate the navigations of that, especially, I know that's something we've been having a lot of conversations in Canada around, is like the cost of food and like the threats of tariffs and stuff like that. Like we just don't know.
It's so ridiculous. It is so ridiculous to have to worry about these little things because of what's happening in the world.
Yeah, 100%. But here we are. Yeah. I'm interested because, speaking to your experience having opened Ciao Gloria right before COVID and then really working through that and opening up Pasta Night, have you noticed anything as, a restaurant owner in terms of appetite or kind of expectations that the customers have? Has that shifted at all as they come back to more hearty foods, or, what are you seeing there?
It's interesting because I've been in the business long enough that I experienced like that first recession in the US in like 2008. I was worried at that time because I was like, oh my God, people are not going to want to spend money anymore. But what I did find is like people will still spend money for these little luxuries like coffee, a cookie, a dessert, something like an immediate sense of satisfaction. So I've always kind of held true to that. So I always find that in difficult times or times of stress, people want comforting things, obviously. So, to kind of provide that has always been a goal of mine. It's like I never want anything to be too unattainable. So, and I want everything to be good as well, So the chocolate chip cookies we make at Ciao should be delicious, and you want them all the time, and they should be at a good price point. But people always want that, people always want a cup of coffee. People always want a nice plate of pasta, so I'm going in with that mentality with Pasta Night, especially now because it's like we're past COVID, but now we're in another stressful time, and how do we navigate that, and what can we provide to the guest that makes them want to come again and again, but also give them something that is delicious and familiar and comforting.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Like it seems like you're walking this really interesting kind of balance of, pushing the idea of like what it is to be authentic or the terroir of certain recipes and dishes, but then also providing that like consistency and that comfort for people as we progress through ever unprecedented times.
Exactly. That's it. That's kind of like what I'm trying to achieve. So, and I think people are clicking into that, and it takes a little bit of time to kind of get on everyone's radar. So we're still in those early months with Pasta Night, but Ciao is 5 years old and has become a neighborhood spot. So I'm just hoping the same happens with Pasta Night over the next, so.
Yeah, I hope that for you too. And I'm curious, I'll be following along from up in cold Canada, but but thank you so much, Renato. I really appreciate you taking the time to share more about Pasta Night and Ciao Gloria. It's been such a pleasure. Do you mind sharing where people can find you online if they want to come check out the restaurant or follow along in the journey as well?
Yeah, of course. And it's funny, I also have a cookbook, and that came out. Yeah, that came out last June, and it's called Dolce, and it's kind of like the unofficial cookbook for Ciao. So you could find that book anywhere, on your Amazons or your Barnes & Nobles, or local bookstores are best. And then you can find Ciao Gloria online and on Instagram at Ciao Gloria or ciaogloria.com. And Pasta Night on Instagram is Pasta Night BK online as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Renato. It's truly been such a pleasure getting to chat and get to know you a little bit better.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.